Hello and welcome to our second video of our YouTube series C# Programming for Unity. Today we're going to talk about variables. So please open your editor, and as you can see I removed all the debug log statements from last time, so we have a clean and fresh script to start with. So what is a variable? Basically a variable is just a storage for data. You can store data in a variable, you can declare a variable, and declaring a variable just means that you say it's there. You just say it's existing. And also, you can change the data that you already stored in a variable at any point in time with your C# script. There are two ways to declare a variable: explicit declaring and implicit declaring. Let's start with explicit declaring. If you want to declare a variable explicitly, you need to tell the compiler explicitly which data type it has. But what is a data type? A data type is pretty self-explaining. Like the name already says, it is a type of data. If you think about data, which types can data have? Let's think about that. You can have text, you can have numbers, you can have floating point numbers, and maybe you can even have decisions. And maybe it will surprise you, but all of those were already data types. Of course, in the programming world they will have different names, but basically all of those were some of the most common data types for programming. Okay, let's start with something easy. Let's declare a whole number. To declare a variable, we need to give it a data type first, and after that we will write the variable name. You can choose any name that you like. When naming your variables, you can use letters, digits, or underscores. Remember that the first character of your variable name needs to be a letter or underscore. You can't use C# keywords as a variable name, and your variable names are always case sensitive, so it matters how you write your variable names. The data type that you need to use for a whole number is called int. Int stands for integer. Remember, declaring a variable means the same as creating it. So if you declared a variable, all you told the compiler is that the variable is existing. It does not have a value yet. If you give the variable its first value, that's what you call initializing. After you initialized your variable with the first value, you can always change the value in the code, and you can work with the value from there on. As you can see, I declared my first variable called number. But I want to show you an example on how to declare and initialize a variable in the same line. If you want to initialize a variable, you can write the variable name equals and then the value that you want to give it. But if you want to declare and initialize a variable in the same line, you can write the data type, the variable name, and then an equals and the value that you want to give it. Remember that all the things that we do here, declaring a variable, initializing a variable, changing the value of a variable, all of that are commands as well. So we need to end every line with a semicolon. Okay, let's delete all of this, and for now I will always initialize the variable directly, so I will assign the first value in the same line that I declared the variable. Okay, let me show you how to change the value of a variable. As you can see, you just write number, so the variable name, equals, and then the value that you want to give it. And as you can see, after I changed the value once, I can also change it a second time. You can change a variable's value as often as you like. You can also increment and decrement a variable's value, but I'll show you more on that later. I want to give you an example on how the change of a variable's value would work. If I would write two debug logs, one after number equals 5 and one after number equals 20, and both of them would log the value of number. If I would run it then, I would get 5 and after that 20, because the debug log after number equals 5 would find the value of number to be 5, and the debug log after number equals 20 would find the value of number to be 20. The data type int can store numbers up to round about 4.3 billion. But because you also can store negative values, it can roughly store half of it in positive and half of it in negative. If you don't want to store negative values but only positive values, you can use uint, which stands for unsigned int, because signed int is negative and positive values, and unsigned int is only positive values. That goes for many more data types, not only for int. An integer uses 32 bits to store its value. A bit is the smallest way to store a value. A bit can either be 0 or 1. The PC works with bits because it can either put power on or power off, for example a cable or an electrical conductor. And that's where I want to introduce the next data type. It's called long. Long is basically the same as integer because it can store whole numbers. But long uses 64 bits to store its numbers, so it can store a much bigger range of numbers than int. Normally, integer is just fine to store your numbers, but in case you need to store a very large number, you can use long. Exactly the same like with integer, you can use long as signed numbers and ulong for unsigned numbers. The next data type I want to show you is called float. You can use float to store floating point numbers, but remember to always put the letter F behind your number so the compiler knows that your number is a floating point number. The next data type is called double. Double uses 64 bits to store floating point numbers, whereas float uses 32 bits to store floating point numbers. So double can store a larger range of floating point numbers, and you always need to end a double with D so the compiler knows that it's a double. I also want to quickly talk about the not so common data types here. So I want to mention decimal, which is a 128-bit floating point number data type, and short, which is a 16-bit integer number data type. If you want to store a single character, you can use the data type char, which stands for character. Remember, if you initialize a char, that you put the character between single quotation marks. In case you want to store more text than just a single character, you can use the data type string. String is basically just an array of chars, but I want to talk about this in detail later. Remember to always put your strings between double quotation marks. The next data type lets you store decision, or maybe you could also say answers to questions, which are limited to yes or no statements. This data type is called bool, which stands for boolean, and it can either be true or false. True basically stands for yes or right, and false basically stands for wrong or no. Okay, the last data type I want to show you today is called byte, and byte can have a value between 0 and 255. A byte is basically just 8-bit. Okay, that's it for the most common data types for C#, and now I want to show you how to print the values of your variables to the console. To do that, just call debug log like we did in the last video, but this time between the round brackets you will write the variable name of the variable that you want to print to the console. Okay, let's do exactly that. First I want to print the string a text, and after that I want to log my number to the console. And now I want to show you if I change the number now, which is 10 right now, if I change it now to 25 and log number afterwards, I will first log 10 and after that 25. So let's run this so you can see the results. Okay, so let's go over it one more time for your understanding. First we will log a text, which is this is a text, to the console. So the first thing we should see in the console at the top of the console will be a text, which is this is a text. And then we will log 10 to the console because our number is 10 at this moment. Then we change the value of our number to 25. And after this, we log our number again, so we will see 25. So in the console, we should see this is a text, in the next line 10, and the last line should have the value 25. Okay, so now remember to always save your script before you want to try it out, because otherwise the changes will not be seen in the editor. Okay, after saving your script, switch to the Unity editor, press start, and if we go to the console now, you can see that we see the text that we wrote in the variable a text. After that we see the value 10, and after that the value 25. Okay, so now you learned how to explicitly type a variable. Let's learn how to implicitly type a variable. If you want to type a variable implicitly, you need to start with the keyword var. Okay, so let's declare a variable and initialize it in the same line and give it a value. I gave it the value of a number. If we type a variable implicitly with the keyword var, we let the compiler decide which data type to assign to the variable based on the value that we stored in it. If I now decide to write a debug log statement to log the value of the variable, you can see that if I execute the script, that it works just the same like with a normal integer variable. Okay, that's it for this video. The goal of this video was to explain to you what is a variable, how to declare a variable, what is the declaration of a variable, what is initialization of a variable, and how to initialize a variable, how to assign a value to a variable, how to change the value of a variable, and how to implicitly and explicitly type a variable. I hope you learned something new, and I see you next time. Welcome to the end of this video. Hit the subscribe button to stay updated. Also, if you need some high quality assets for your game or like our channel and want to support us, feel free to check out our assets at the Unity or Unreal Asset Store. You'll find the link to our store pages in the description. I hope you learned something new and see you next time.